Hello everyone and welcome to another incredible game played between these two legends, Boris Spassky versus Bobby Fischer. It was played in the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966. It's a legendary event. There's even a nice book about it written by Isaac Kazdan, and he goes over some of the games, but mostly talks about the tournament and gives us some very valuable info now that we are covering these games over, well, 50 years after they have been played, much over 50 years than after they have been played. And it's an incredible game and an incredible tournament for a few reasons. We've discussed this tournament, well, over the course of years, over the Bobby Fischer saga. We've never actually covered it, so it is definitely one tournament we could cover, maybe from the perspective of Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer, as it was incredibly competitive. I've mentioned in the previous video that Bobby was having a bad tournament, and then all of a sudden he just started playing incredibly well. And this is the tournament that I was talking about. Boris Spassky visited Bobby Fischer in his room, invited him to go for a walk. This was after the first half of the tournament because Fischer didn't have a good start to the tournament. He lost 3 games, which is, for Fischer, that's, not just in a tournament, but in the first half of the tournament, to lose 3 games, that is unheard of. And Spassky was leading the tournament right from the start. And then, after this, sort of pleasant encounter with Spassky, Fischer went on a rampage. He won 4 games in a row, and in the penultimate round, he was tied with Spassky. It was Fischer versus Spassky in the penultimate round, and Fischer did not manage to win. It was a draw, and then we go into the final round where Fischer had to face Tigran Petrosyan. He only managed to draw, whereas Spassky defeated Hein Donner and won the tournament, half a point ahead of Fischer. Now, we're going to discuss this a little bit more, but this is the first half of the tournament, and it is Spassky versus Fischer. So let's check it out. This is one game between these two gentlemen that I've never shown, and I thought, now's the time to show it. So let's check it out. Spassky has the white pieces, and he opens with pawn to d4. In terms of strength, this was an incredibly strong tournament. Had an incredible viewership. For example, second game between Fischer and Spassky is said to have almost 1,000 live viewers. That's the biggest viewership in the United States back then. We have pawn knight to f6, and now pawn to c4. Going into this round, Fischer, this is round 8. Fischer already lost a game in round 7 to Miguel Najdorf. We have pawn to g6 by Fischer, knight to c3, and d5. The Gruenfeld defense is on the board. We have captures, pawn to e4, and knight captures on c3, b captures, and now bishop to g7. So the exchange Gruenfeld, as it is played today, nothing weird happening here. We have bishop to c4, pawn to c5, and knight to e2, defending the center, and Fischer goes knight to c6, puts more pressure on the center, as that is what you do if you play the Gruenfeld. And now just bishop to e3, pretty standard developing move. Now, just to show you a nice fun line here, what if white plays d5? Because you kind of played knight e2, you defend the c3 pawn. Why can't you play knight d5? Isn't this just free space waiting to be captured? Well, it goes into a very forcing line where black can go after the light square bishop via knight to a5 or knight to e5, and wherever you go, black will just have an incredibly pleasant game. For example, you will play e6, now let's say f4, c4. Now with tempo attacking the bishop, and now you could go into some crazy lines like bishop to a3, and while it is playable for white, these are very forcing lines, and black always finds something to do, like knight g4, you want to go for knight to e3, maybe queen to h4 is coming, let's say bishop captures c4, knight e3 attacks queen and rook, queen d3, knight captures on c4, let's say bishop captures on f8, and now let's say queen b6 with check, knight d4, and now something like knight to b2, attacking the queen while preparing to capture the bishop, queen c2, bishop captures, and now you will go after the knight via either this rook or this rook, and then you will defend the knight with bishop to a3, and so on and so on. It's a pretty crazy line, but almost no one plays it, even though it's not terrible. Basically, it's, you know, both white and black are fine here. I guess it's just either overanalyzed or not that difficult to defend for black. So it's better just to keep tension. The bishop to e3, we have castles by both Fischer and Spassky, and now queen to c7. We have rook to c1 and rook to d8, nicely aligning the rook with Spassky's queen. Queen to e1, and now mostly queen a5 is played here, even though this was already a fairly new position at the time. I believe pawn to e6 was maybe a new move, as there are no games with pawn to e6 after this game has been played in the database. So let's call this a completely new game. Okay, Boris strikes with pawn to f4. We have knight a5 with an attack on the bishop, bishop to d3, and now Fischer strikes with f5 as well. Probably just trying to undermine Spassky's strong center, and maybe something like b6, maybe bishop a6 in the future can be an idea, because you need to develop this light square bishop somewhere. We have rook to d1 and pawn to b6, queen to f2 by Spassky, and now c captures on d4 by Fischer. Bishop captures, we have bishop captures on d4, c captures, and now bishop to b7. So this is how Fischer develops the light square bishop. We have knight to g3, and Fischer now plays queen to f7, which is already a suboptimal move. Now, probably Fischer played it to improve his control over the d5 square, but you actually do it by playing queen to g7, which I'm going to explain now. Fischer played queen to f7, and now there is a tactical shot that would not be available had Fischer's queen been played on g7. Here, Spassky plays pawn to d5. And now the problem is, well, if you just capture on d5, then captures on f5, and Fischer's position just falls apart. There's no way to hold this. So after d5, Fischer threw in a nice Zwischenzug with f captures on e4, but Spassky countered with a Zwischenzug of his own, d captures on e6, which would not be available if the queen was, for example, on g7. This way it comes with tempo, so you have to react. Queen captures, and now pawn to f5. This is how Spassky takes over control of the game. And now the problem is, how do you defend? For example, if you play something like queen to f7, or rather queen to f7 was played in the game, but let's say you play something like queen to e7, and let's say you allow pawn to f6, and let's say you play queen to e6, and let's say you allow pawn to f7 check, king to f8, queen b2, and already you can resign this. So that is the reason why Fischer has to keep the queen on the f file. He played queen to f7, and now bishop captures on e4. You could capture here, but if you try something like queen captures on f5, yes, you win a pawn, but the problem is, let's say captures on d8, check captures on d8, and now queen to e1, your king is wide in the open. The extra pawn doesn't matter. This game will not go into an endgame. Something like queen to b5, let's say queen to h4, and this is just terrible for black. So after bishop captures on e4, rook captures on d1, we have rook captures on d1, and now rook to f8. Fischer fully mobilizes his pieces, and now it's a matter of, well, how to survive this, because Spassky's king is much safer than Fischer's king. We have bishop back to b1 and queen to f6 now. Trying to hold on, because Fischer is no longer playing this for a win unless Spassky messes this up. Fischer's king is way too weak here, especially with the bishop still being in the game. We have queen to c2, and now Fischer played king to h8, which is not the best move, but it requires a beautiful tactical shot to fully utilize the position. What Fischer should have done is something like b5. It's a move that doesn't really make all that much sense, but you know that queen c7 is coming. So b5 preparing knight to c4, now it kind of does make sense. And even if queen to c7, you could play something like queen to c6, offer a queen trade, and try and hold this bad endgame. Something like captures, and captures. Okay, you get the knight into the game. You're down a pawn, but maybe the 2-1 advantage on the queen side, maybe you have drawing chances here. So that was Fischer's best bet. He played queen to h8, and now look at this. Spassky played f captures on g6, and Fischer played h captures on g6, saying that, okay, maybe if you capture here, then I can play queen to f2 check and checkmate your king. So that would be pretty good for Fischer. But Spassky actually played I'm not going to tell you what Spassky played. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the best possible move that, the only move that wins the game for Spassky, while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this, well, impossible line to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is knight to h5. This is the move that wins, but not for the obvious reasons. Of course, you will not capture and allow checkmate on h7. The point is much deeper. After, let's say, queen f7 or something, because you kind of want to keep control over the f2 square, queen to c3 check, king h7, and now look at this, queen to g3. Okay, obviously the queen still cannot move away from the defense of the g6 pawn. You are eyeing that 7th rank with the queen and the rook, so it's a pretty tricky position. And the problem is black has no way to play this. The g pawn is of course still pinned. But let's say you play a natural move, knight to c4. Already the position falls apart. So it's not something that you can really calculate over the board, especially since we don't have the clock times, because there are moves that black can play. It's just that all of them lose the game. For example, knight c4 again loses by a tactic of queen h4, now threatening nasty discoveries and also putting pressure on that knight. And now once you move the king because you want to avoid the nasty discoveries, now you're just going to play bishop captures on g6 because the queen cannot defend the knight on c4 and the pawn on g6. And once you capture, now the position opens up, queen captures with check, king h7, rook to d7 with check, let's say king h6, knight g3, and good luck defending that king over there. Most likely something like this would happen, queen to b1 check, you're going to play knight f1, and now queen to e4, threatening checkmate and forcing a queen trade. Otherwise, it's black who's getting checkmated, and you would actually very happily accept this because white also wins the a7 pawn. And now it's like that endgame that we discussed where you would be down a pawn but have 2 versus 1 on the queen side. Here, it's no such thing. You would have a 1 against 1 on the queen side, plus 2 connected pass pawns on the king side, and of course, this is completely winning now. So, knight h5 completely winning for Boris, but Boris played queen to d2, which also makes sense. You are eyeing that h6 square, but now you allow Fischer to just get a nice position. He plays king to g7, and there's no queen h6, and there's no follow-up. Knight h5 check no longer does anything as the queen moved from this diagonal. So this is now an equal position, and the game continues. So Spassky has beaten Fischer. Fischer survives, and now he has to try and beat him again. Rook to f1. As the king is on an open board, while it is possible to play this, it is very hard. We have queen to e7, and now queen to d4 check. Rook f6, and now knight to e4, with a triple attack on the rook, queen, knight, and rook attacking that rook. So you have to eliminate one of the attackers. Bishop captures on e4, and now queen to c5. Fischer forces a queen trade, but now the problem is, even though all of the other endgames that we've discussed, maybe Fischer could play, here playing knight versus bishop in a game where there's play on both sides of the board will be very difficult. So queen captures, we have rook captures on f1 with check, king captures, and b captures on c5. We have pawn to h4, stopping the pawn from coming to g5, as you are cementing it on a light square, where it will be a target forever. Knight to c4, and now king to e2. And Fischer already plays a suboptimal move, plays knight to e5. Better was something like king h6, and then if, let's say, you play bishop f3 to cut off the king from entering the game, now you play knight e5, and you take away the squares from the light square bishop, so the king can enter the game. However, after king e2, knight to e5 was played by Fischer. Now comes king e3, and Fischer plays king to f6. We have king f4, knight to f7, nicely controlling all of the squares here, so the white king cannot go any further. King back to e3, and now Fischer should just hold on with something like maybe knight to d6, but he plays pawn to g5. He wants to reduce material, and Spassky says not so fast. Pawn to h5, and gets a nice passed h-pawn. And king e5 may be still playable for Fischer, but he played knight to h6, and now he completely misplaced the position. This is move 40, so I don't know the time controls for the tournament. Maybe it was you had to reach move 40 to gain additional time control. So could be that that was the reason, but now his position is completely winning, but only if you are a sensational endgame player. What would you play here? Feel free and win the game for the second time for Boris, but this time for real, while I give you a couple of seconds. The move in question is king to d3. This is what Spassky played, and now you will see just why this position is hopeless for Fischer. So what? Let's say you try king e5. It wasn't played in the game. It's something similar was played, but just to show you why king d3 is so strong, you put black in zugzwang. So the knight is stuck here. Not here, but the knight is stuck somewhere around here, guarding that h6 square. You cannot allow the pawn to march forward. And the king will be stuck guarding the c5 pawn. You'll play king c4. Now the black king is stuck guarding the pawn, and the knight is stuck guarding the h6 square. And now whatever you play, let's say knight f5, white, or rather Spassky, simply improves his position and gets his a pawn up the board. You have to repeat moves. Let's say you go here. Let's say bishop b4, you take away the f5 square for the knight, doesn't matter, you advance the pawn to a5, let's say knight h6, and I just go king b5. King a6, you capture the pawn, and then the passed a pawn will win you the game. It is that simple. So Fischer played king to e6, Spassky played bishop to a8, and Fischer played king to d6. We have king to c4, and now Fischer tried pawn to g6 because we've seen, well, everything else loses. Pawn to a4, and now knight to g8. We have pawn to a5, knight to h6, and now bishop to e4. Similar to what we've discussed, taking away the f5 square from the knight, pawn to g3, and now king to b5, going after the a7 pawn. We have knight to g8, bishop back to b1, and now knight to h6. We have king to a6, going after the pawn, king to c6, and here just bishop to a2, and he was in this position on move 50 that Bobby Fischer resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The a7 pawn will fall, doesn't matter, you could play something like knight f5, you're going to lose the a7 pawn, let's say king c7, and now just whatever, bishop e6, you attack the knight, knight d4, the pawn marches forward, and that's it. Either this pawn wins or this pawn wins, whatever you try, that's pretty much it. You could even give up the bishop, as the knight cannot cover the h8 square in time. So of course Fischer resigned, and this is the half of the tournament that everyone was talking about. So he lost to Naidorf in the previous round, now he loses to Spassky in round 8. He managed to draw Tigran Petrosian in round 9, but 3 losses for Fischer in the first half of the tournament. Then that pleasant walk and encounter with Spassky, and then all of a sudden Fischer goes on a rampage. He wins 4 games in a row, whereas Spassky, he got like 7 draws and 1 win, and he was still leading the tournament up to a point where Fischer got all of those wins, and then they were tied. In the penultimate round, it was Fischer versus Spassky. Fischer needed to win with white to overtake Spassky in the tournament, but it was a draw. And then, like I said, in the final round, another draw for Fischer against Tigran Petrosian, and Spassky defeated Hein Donner and managed to, overshadow Fischer by half a point. Before checking out the standings, here's a nice photo of Fischer and Spassky. It's from Isaac Hashdan's book with Mr. and Mrs. Piatigorsky. You can see Spassky. It's hard to make out what it is. I imagine that's the first place trophy that he's holding, and Fischer next to them for some reason, because he's Fischer. He's always invited to a photo, I guess. I mean, look at the final standings of the tournament. So Spassky 11.5 out of 18, 5 wins, 0 draws, 0 losses, and 13 draws. And Fischer, second place, almost overtakes Spassky, half a point less, 7 wins, 3 losses, and 8 draws. So, okay. I mean, crazy guy that Fischer. I mean, after such a terrible event, it was heralded as the greatest comeback in the history of tournaments. I mean, incredible stuff. And interestingly, you have Tigran Petrosian here, who was a world champion, only on 50%. And I think at the time, I don't know if it's still the case, he was the only world champion ever to get 50% in a tournament ever since Alexander Alyekhin, after that poor tournament that Alyekhin played. So yeah, pretty incredible game. It's it's a shame that Spassky did not find knight to h5, but that's the problem with these old tournaments. We don't have the situation on the clock. Maybe it was Spassky who was in time trouble. Maybe it was Fischer who was in time trouble, and Spassky just wanted him to make a mistake or something. But yeah, knight to h5. Had Spassky played this, I have no doubt that this would have been considered Spassky's immortal game, but it's not. It's the one against Bent Larsen. Like I said, if you haven't seen it, will be the first two links in the description below. Also, if you haven't seen Spassky's first ever game against Fischer, it will be also the first link in the description below. The legendary King's Gambit game. But yeah, that's the story of this game, the story of this tournament. Spassky wins. He was considered to be a very strong contender for the title, but after winning this tournament like this, and even though Fischer had a bad first half of the tournament, he demolished everyone in the second half of the tournament. It was still Spassky who won first place. There was I don't think there was any doubt in anyone's mind that Spassky was next in line for the World Chess Championship title, but also that Fischer was definitely somewhere around there. Maybe it just wasn't his time yet. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, if you have any other brilliant games by Spassky or ones that you find dear to heart, do use hashtag suggestion. I will very happily go over them. I could go on for like a week or two showing just Spassky games, as I love these old games, and especially when played so nicely. So do that. If not, maybe I just show this entire tournament, from Spassky and Fischer's perspective. I mean, I would enjoy that very much. I'm pretty sure many of you would as well. So comment on that as well. And yeah, very nicely done. We've said this many times, before facing Spassky in a World Chess Championship match, Fischer has never defeated Spassky. He only suffered losses to Spassky, and that's what made that event even more memorable for Fischer. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Amelia Gray Scott, Casey Jones, Janko Popovic, Kushan Porfushun, and David Gasparian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.